Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast, made for women who want their healthiest years to be ahead of them, not behind them. Join your host, Courtney Townley, right now as she breaks down the fairy tale health story you have been chasing all of your life into sensible action steps and lasting change. Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast. This is your host, Courtney Townley, and as always, I am so deeply grateful that you're here. And before we get started today, I want to send a very heartfelt thank you to those of you who took the time over the past couple of weeks to go on over to iTunes and rate and review the Grace and Grit podcast. I announced on the last episode of the show that I am committed to doing a drawing once a month for a free consult, a free 1-hour consult with me. And all you have to do to get your name entered into that drawing is to rate and review the show on iTunes. And then you got to email me and let me know that you've done so, because I can't tell who you are just by your iTunes handle. Now, this is not for vanity purposes. The reason I am encouraging you to rate and review the show is because I am so deeply passionate about this podcast and the Grace and Grit message that I want it to spread like wildfire. I want it to get into the ears of as many women as possible because I believe so deeply in this work. And this is one of the ways that you can help me do that. So I hope you will take me up on the offer if you haven't done so already. And don't forget, after you leave the review, you've got to email me at courtney@graceandgrit.com so I know to enter your name. Now today, we are going to be talking about something that I think many of you are very familiar with. We're going to be talking about overwhelm, what causes it, and more importantly, how to extinguish it. How to improve your relationship with it. So I'm speaking directly to emotional overwhelm, which is being in a state of thinking about your current life problems in a way that feels all-consuming and stifling and ultimately very paralyzing. Now, overwhelm is a human emotion. It's not good, it's not bad. It's just a human emotion. It's on the spectrum of human emotions, meaning you're going to feel it in your lifetime. It is going to show up for you. But how often it shows up and how intensely it shows up will be largely determined by how you think about your life. So overwhelm is really more of a reflection of the thoughts that you have about your life than it really is about your life. So I chose this topic for a lot of reasons. First of all, I know it's a topic that a lot of women rumble with. I know a lot of women are wrestling with overwhelm almost on an ongoing basis. And like I said, overwhelm ultimately is incredibly paralyzing, which means you don't take action. And action, as you know, is a very important piece of creating progress in your life, right? You can't change your life if you don't take action. So overwhelm is really not helpful in any way to you taking action. It's not useful. Now, again, I'm not saying it's bad. It does have a message for you. And that is something I think we should pay attention to. All emotions have messages for us. They have something to tell us. And overwhelm is no exception. It has insight for you about how you're living your life and where your life might need a little recalibrating or renovation. And I actually love this perspective of overwhelm because it really changes my relationship with overwhelm, where when I recognize it in my life, I approach it very differently, meaning now at this point in my life, I ask what information it has for me versus just getting stuck in this cycle of repeating that I'm feeling overwhelmed. So we need to be curious about our overwhelm. A lot of you have heard me talk about Susan David, who wrote the book Emotional Agility. And it's so funny because Susan David is everywhere right now. I saw her on the Brene Brown podcast. I've seen her on in so many spaces and places recently. But this book has been out for years, and I've been talking about it for years. And I specifically, in my Consistency Code program, which is a part of my Rumble and Rise community, one of the very first things I teach my students is how to find their state of whelm. And this is a Susan David concept that I love so much. Your state of whelm is where you feel challenged in your life, because challenge is a beautiful thing. It's how we grow and learn and evolve as humans. But we don't challenge ourselves so much that we get into a state of overwhelm. And we don't under-challenge ourselves to the point of feeling just, sort of blah about our life. We don't want to be overwhelmed. We don't want to be underwhelmed. We just want to find our state of whelm. And finding your state of whelm, I think, is not just a great life philosophy, but it's really important to behavior change, which is largely the work that I do with my students. But I wanted to read you an excerpt from Susan David's book, Emotional Agility, about this concept, because I think she says it so beautifully. Here's the quote. "Perhaps the best term to describe living at the edge of our ability, thriving and flourishing, being challenged but not overwhelmed, is simply whelmed. And a key part of being whelmed lies in being selective in our commitments, which means taking on the challenges that really speak to you and that emerge from an awareness of your deepest values." I want to read that last part one more time because I think it's so important to sear on your brain. A key part of being whelmed lies in being selective in our commitments, which means taking on the challenges that really speak to you and that emerge from an awareness of your deepest values. So we're going to be talking a little bit later more specifically on that. How do you get selective in your commitments? How do you develop awareness of your deepest values? These are really important things to know and skills to develop in order to get out of a state of overwhelm. So why do we get overwhelmed? So many reasons. So this is not going to be an exhaustive list, but some of the things that show up very often in the work that I do with my clients are things like not setting boundaries and not saying no, working overtime trying to make other people happy or approve of your choices. It's a really easy way to get yourself into a state of overwhelm is trying to make all people happy all the time. And we do this because we don't want to disappoint other people, or we want the validation of other people. So we do need to learn how to set boundaries, and we do need to get comfortable with saying no to the things that don't serve our deepest values. And that is going to disappoint some people. And it is going to probably turn away some people that may be in your life, and that is perfectly okay. Not easy, but okay. We also get overwhelmed because we're not willing to practice constraint. We're not willing to limit our options or our choices. And I am so guilty of this. My husband always laughs at me. He's like, you're like a raccoon. You've got like shiny object syndrome, right? Anything that's new and exciting, I want to be a part of, which, by the way, if you know anything about the Enneagram, I'm a 7. So I'm the adventurer. I love change. I love excitement. I love new opportunities and experiences. And so when newness comes into my world, it is so easy for me to bite. I want to do all things because I want to experience it all. And that is a very fast track to overwhelm because I've done it so many times. So I really have to work to rein myself in and practice constraint by remembering what my deepest values are, what I have chosen to focus my life on at this given time, and really limit my options, which sounds like a terrible thing, but it's actually a wonderful thing. Now, when I talk to my own clients about practicing constraint, a couple things come up. The first thing that comes up is the fear of missing out, right? That life is meant to be lived, and if I practice constraint, I'm going to miss out on so many things. But you could also argue that if you spread yourself too thin, you're going to miss out on the opportunity of experiencing any one thing fully. So that argument can go either way. The other thing that I hear a lot is that by limiting my options, by practicing constraint, I'm robbing myself of freedom, which is fascinating because when we don't constrain how much we're eating or what we're eating or how much we're drinking or how much we're Netflixing or how much we're working or how much we're beating ourselves up, how much self-judgment we inflict, right? If we don't put constraint on those types of things, it can lead to a lot of negative consequences. And those consequences will cost you your freedom. They might cost you your freedom in terms of health. In fact, I would argue almost all of those will cost you your freedom with your health. They might cost you the freedom that you feel in relationships. Again, that argument can go either way. But I believe that practicing constraint, limiting our options, really choosing our focus is such a kind thing to do for ourselves, specifically when it comes to living in our state of whelm. Also learning how to make decisions hard and fast. I've talked about this in other episodes. I did a whole podcast, I think it was late last fall, called Why You Owe It to Yourself to Decide. Not making decisions is exhausting and so overwhelming. Because think about it, the more decisions you don't make today, the more things start stacking up in terms of future decisions that you will have to make. So learning how to make decisions quickly and fiercely. And what I mean by fiercely is you just decide that given what you know right now, this is the best decision. And no matter how it turns out, I can always make another decision. So if it turns out to be the wrong decision, I can always make another decision. But a lot of women are not giving themselves permission to decide hard and fast because they're afraid of failing. And the byproduct of that is a ton of overwhelm. I'll give you a really concrete example. I talked about this inside of my Rumble and Rise community the other night. My son is in 5th grade, and next year he goes on to junior high. And a part of the junior high curriculum is he gets to choose between choir, band, or orchestra. So that alone was a big decision for him. And he wrestled with it for, a good solid 10 days. And what's really funny about that decision is I think he knew what he wanted to do on the first day, which was band. But then he wrestled with it for 10 more days and ultimately still made the decision to do band. And ladies, how often do we do that? We know the answer, but we don't give ourselves permission to really decide. And so then we end up spending a lot more time and energy that we didn't need to spend. All this to say, he finally decided on band. And if you know anything about band, there's a lot of instruments to choose. So now we had another decision to make. And he watched this very extensive video about all the instruments he had the options of playing, and he had to pick two. He had to pick a first option and a second option. And the mental distress in my child over the course of a 48-hour period was intense. And he used the word overwhelmed. I feel overwhelmed, Mom. There's so many options. What if I make the wrong choice? And he was afraid of failing. He was afraid that if he made the wrong choice, he picked an instrument that he ultimately didn't like, it's like he was bound to that for the rest of his life. And what I told him is, babe, life is a series of decisions. So you decide today based on the best of what you know. And maybe that decision will move you forward in the direction you want to go. Maybe you'll love it. Or maybe that decision will move you kind of in the opposite direction of where you want to go. It won't feel like the right decision after a period of time. And if that's what happens, guess what you get to do? You get to make another decision. And then another and another and another, because that's all life is a series of decisions. But by not deciding, we think that we're saving ourselves from future pain. But what we're really doing is causing a tremendous amount of pain in the present because we're overwhelming ourselves by not deciding. And decisions, a lot of decisions needing to be made, start to compound. And it overwhelms the brain. It overwhelms you. And how do you show up when you feel overwhelmed? Well, you don't really. Another reason we get overwhelmed is because we don't plan. I don't work with a woman who doesn't have a very full life. And then she hires me because she wants to change her life in a meaningful way. And there is absolutely no way on God's green earth that would ever be possible unless she was willing to organize and plan strategically to make room for this new thing. So not planning, in my opinion, is really just failing in advance. It's just deciding in advance this really isn't that important to you. Because if you don't have a plan, you can just use that as rationalization for not showing up. That's what I mean by failing in advance. So when you want to make a change in your life, you've got to have a strategy. You've got to have a plan because it takes a lot of pressure off your brain. It helps you organize your brain, and it helps you to make less decisions because you've already pre-decided. We also get overwhelmed because we don't take action in a reasonable time frame. And what I mean by that is we either take on way too much too fast. This is what I see a lot of women do in the diet and fitness industry. Or we save everything until the last minute. We procrastinate, right? And I would even argue that these Hail Mary approaches that a lot of women buy into to try to improve their health, like overhaul your life overnight, is almost a form of procrastination. Instead of taking a little bit of action every single day over a longer period of time, you want to take a lot of action in a short period of time to get a big result. And procrastination is very overwhelming because it's very intense. And I know because I was the queen of it for many years. And the reason I was the queen of procrastination is because I had a storyline in my head that this is just my process. This is just my creative process to save everything to the end and then spend how many nights, pull all these all-nighters to get something done. And sure, it turns out awesome. I'm proud of it. But I'm spent and I never want to do it again. And that's so unnecessary. So procrastination can absolutely cause a lot of overwhelm. Putting really strict timelines on things without a really smart strategy can create a lot of overwhelm. And then finally, and this is certainly, like I said, this is not a complete list of things that contribute to overwhelm, but the last thing I want to talk about today in terms of what contributes to overwhelm is perfectionism. Perfectionism is an impossible standard. And when you tell yourself that you can't deliver a project or put something out into the world or take part in something until you are perfect at it, that creates a lot of overwhelm and wastes so much time and energy. So perfectionism definitely contributes to overwhelm. So obviously, to extinguish overwhelm, we have to address all of these things and more. So I won't be able to get into everything today, but I do want to touch on a few really powerful skill sets that I think can hugely improve your relationship with overwhelm. So when you sense that you are overwhelmed, you can get yourself out of a state of overwhelm much quicker than if you didn't have these skills. If you enjoy the Grace and Grit podcast, I would love to extend an invitation to you to join me inside of my exclusive membership called Rumble and Rise. Rumble and Rise was created to help women ditch diet culture and really learn how to become self-directed along their health journey. It is heavily rooted in mindset, helping you to like who you are, what you do, and why you do the things you do. Rumble and Rise is an incubator of support and education unlike anything else you will find inside the health and wellness space, especially for the price point. It's only $59 a month, or if you opt for the annual membership, it's $590 a year. So what exactly does your membership fee get you? Every single week, I offer a group coaching call where I invite you to hop on a call with me and other members and allow me to coach you through whatever you're wrestling with along your health journey. There is a very robust library of masterclasses waiting for you that will help you to become more self-directed along your health journey. There is a very robust vault of resources available to you, including guided meditations, workouts, nutrition information, and best of all, the masterclasses, the replays of the group coaching calls, and the guided meditations are all accessible through a members-only private podcast. So you can access everything on the go. If you love the Grace and Grit podcast, if you resonate with the message and you have wanted to work with me, this is the best of what I have to offer you as a coach. The feedback from current members has been remarkable, and I would be so honored for you to join us. You can find out all the juicy details of what the membership includes, and you can register by going to graceandgrit.com/ready to rumble. And there's no long-term obligation. You can leave at any time. So once again, graceandgrit.com/ready to rumble. I really hope I will be seeing you on the inside. So the first thing, which I just want to reiterate, I mentioned it earlier, but I just want to say it again, is that overwhelm has a message for you. So when you notice that overwhelm is knocking at your door, she has shown up to your party uninvited, I want you to ask her some good questions. Because overwhelm actually doesn't like questions. Overwhelm wants to consume you without you being curious, right? It just wants to overpower you. And so by you getting inquisitive, you actually disempower overwhelm. So some of the questions you might want to ask: why are you here? What message do you have for me? What do you need from me? Right? Really simple questions. And you know the answer. If you're willing to slow down and get a little bit reflective, I guarantee you will find the answers to those questions. You may not like the answers, but you will find the answers. The next thing I want to address in terms of extinguishing overwhelm is you have got to learn how to honor that you have certain resources available to you every day, that although they are renewable, they are limited. And I'm speaking to things like time and energy and focus and willpower. You only get so much of these things every single day. And they're largely dependent on how you treat yourself, how you take care of yourself. So if you don't take very good care of yourself, you probably have less of these resources available to you each day. But if you neglect to recognize that these are limited resources, you will live your life in a way that causes a tremendous amount of unnecessary overwhelm. Because you won't be able to focus, you won't have much energy, you're never going to feel like you have enough time, And you are really going to struggle to follow through with the promises that you make to yourself, which I believe has a lot to do with that, with willpower. That's how I define willpower, is that ability to follow through. And when you don't have energy, you don't have time, you don't have focus, and you don't have willpower, you're going to create more overwhelm for yourself because you're not getting anything done. You're not showing up. So a big part of honoring these limited resources is learning how to minimize your choices, learning how to narrow your focus and practice constraint. So making a list of the foods that you do want to fuel your body with, right? Not a list of things you can't have, because no one's going to follow that. But making a list of foods that absolutely nourish your body, that you enjoy eating, and constraining your choices to that list, how would that change your life? Now, a lot of people hear that and they're like, no way could I live like that, right? It brings up a lot of things. Notice it. Notice what it brings up for you. A lot of people do this with their clothing, right? We know a lot of really famous people through history who wore the same thing every single day. And they do it because they are honoring that those resources of time, energy, focus, and willpower are limited. And they don't want to waste those resources on decisions like what to wear. Because for them, it doesn't fit in with their standard of life. It doesn't fit in line with their value system. And so they have decided to constrain their choices based on who they want to be in the world. How do they want to spend their time, energy, focus, and willpower? And I get it, right? People do not like constraint for all the reasons I mentioned earlier. We have a fear of missing out. We tell ourselves we don't have any freedom. And again, I would argue for those things in terms of practicing constraint, narrowing your focus actually allows you more freedom. On the other side, it gives you freedom in bigger ways. I'm sure you've had this experience at some point where you walk into like a paint store, right? You just need some white paint for your wall. And there's like 258 colors of white paint to choose from. I do not like that experience. And I will often say to people, like when I go into an environment like that, where there's so many options, just pick out 5 and show me what those 5 whites are, and I will pick one of those. Because I need to constrain myself from looking at all the options because I spin out an overwhelm. So I want you to just consider, how might you extend yourself a little bit of grace to make less decisions, right? Where are the spaces and places in your life where you're feeling overwhelmed by choice? And what if you just decided ahead of time what your choices were, right? You just decide ahead of time, these are the stores I grocery shop at, and only these. These are the clothes I wear, and only these. These are the foods I eat. These are the things I spend my time on. And they cannot be endless lists, right? The whole idea is to whittle them down into less. Another very powerful way to extinguish overwhelm is, as I mentioned earlier, you make decisions ahead of time. You get organized. So planning your day to be in alignment with how you want to be showing up as a human is a very powerful practice. And I've mentioned many times on the podcast before this concept of integrity pain. Integrity pain, for those of you who've never heard it, is when your actions are very misaligned with what you say you want for your life. So you keep saying that you want to be an active woman, but you never move your body. That's integrity pain. You say you want to feel really energized and alive, each day to show up in all the spaces and places that matter to you, but you consistently stay up binging Netflix, so you're exhausted every morning. Those are examples of integrity pain. And one of the most powerful ways to get out of integrity pain is to make commitments to yourself every day in the form of a daily schedule for how you want to show up, and then follow through with that schedule. Now, I get it, right? There's 3 reasons people don't follow through. There's lots of reasons people don't follow through, but they narrow down into 3 main categories. If you make a plan for how you want to show up today and you don't show up in those ways, you negotiate your way out of your plans, there's 3 primary reasons. Number 1, your plan was too ambitious, right? You created overwhelm by scheduling more than any one human could possibly show up for in a day. I see women do this all the time. But 2 other reasons you may not be showing up is, number 1, you're not managing your brain, right? So it's time to eat the salad you made for lunch, and you're telling yourself that a burger and fries sounds a lot better. And so managing your thoughts around that, like, why did you make the salad in the first place? Why did you pre-decide that this is what you were going to have at lunchtime, right? Managing your brain, managing your thoughts goes a long way in helping you to follow through with the promises that you make to yourself. And then the 3rd reason people don't follow through is because they're not managing their emotions. And your emotions are largely influenced by your thoughts. So if you're not managing your thoughts, your emotions may be all over the place. So organizing yourself, making decisions ahead of time, and planning how you want to show up in your day is really a practice of making promises to yourself and then following through with those promises, which builds your self-trust, which improves the relationship you have with yourself, and skyrockets your confidence. And with more confidence, you live a bigger and bigger life, whatever that means to you. Now, I do want to say this, that in order for you to constrain your choices and plan your days and get yourself organized and make decisions ahead of time, you've got to know your values and your standards for living. So what I mean by that is your values are the things you want to dedicate your time and energy to. Now, when I do value exercises with clients, I often limit them to 3 to 5 values. So if they give me 10 values, I will play the game of like comparing a couple of their values, and we have to eliminate 1. And we keep doing that until we get down to 3 to 5. So knowing the things that you value the most in your life. And then your standards for life are, what do you want your life to represent? What is the purpose of your life? What do you want your life to stand for? Now, there may be many things, but I would challenge you to try to whittle it down to 1 statement. So my statement that I shared with my students recently, one of my standards for living, that really kind of is an overarching standard for living because a lot of things fall under it, is I want to be a fully expressed and authentic human. So what that means is I have to learn how to choose my thoughts with intention. I need to make sure that where I'm spending my time and energy is in contribution to that. So I'm doing work that matters to me. So knowing your own standard for living is a really powerful thing to, again, inquire about, get curious about. What do you want your life to stand for? And one of the exercises I gave a student recently who was kind of rumbling with this is I told her to try one of 2 things. To find her standards, I said, tap into your future self, right? The woman you really want to be in the future. Let's just say 5 or 10 years out, and have her write a letter to you about your life. So your future self is writing a letter to you. And what kinds of things show up in that letter? The other thing that I think is really helpful as an exercise is to write your own obituary. If someone was reading your obituary, and you had a choice in what it said, what would you like it to say? And then how can you use those things as filters for how you spend your time and energy today? Because if you're living in alignment with your values, you're living in alignment with your standards for living, you will reduce overwhelm tremendously because you're not leaking time and energy and those other valuable resources. And I think a lot of overwhelm comes from the leaks we have with those resources. A few things I'll mention here is obviously you need to manage your brain, right? You've got to manage your thoughts, the way you're thinking about your life, what you're choosing to make things mean, because that is hugely going to influence how you feel. And then how you feel is going to hugely influence your behavior. So even the concept of overwhelm, what do you make it mean? Do you make it mean there's something wrong with you? Do you make it mean you're incapable? Or that you've never been good at organizing or strategizing? That you'll never be good at fill in the blank? Because if you're choosing to make overwhelm mean those types of things, you will suffer, right? You will suffer unnecessarily because not only are you experiencing overwhelm, which is hard on its own, but then you're adding insult to injury. You're beating yourself up for feeling something difficult, and that is in no way useful to you. So I choose to make overwhelm mean, I need to do some recalibrating. I need to do some renovating. I need to pull back and take a look at what is truly going on here. And I've got some decisions to make. Because when I look at overwhelm through that lens, it's so much easier to move through it. But if I choose to focus on the other things I mentioned, if I choose to make overwhelm mean there's something wrong with me, I'm never going to get myself out of it. So the final two things I just mentioned here quickly are, I mentioned earlier that perfectionism causes a lot of overwhelm. And I know this is a very relevant thing for a lot of women because I do a lot of coaching around this. And one of the things I offer a lot of my students is getting to a space where the work is good enough. So a lot of times we don't take action until it's perfect, which means we never take action because it's never perfect. And allowing yourself to sort of look at the thing that you're trying to be perfect about as good enough and taking action, shipping the thing, getting it out into the world before it's ready, before it's as perfect as you think it should be or is, right? So we call that kind of like that B- work. It's not perfect, but it's good enough. And I'll tell you, I've shared this with some of my students before that even with this podcast, at the beginning of my podcast journey 5 years ago, I would spend days refining an episode. And I had hardly any listeners and I wouldn't get any feedback. But I was so wrapped up in the concept of perfecting the podcast. And when I finally moved into a space, because I got so much busier in my business, where I couldn't spend as much time, and I really had to get into a place where it's good enough, I actually think that my work was more received. So I started hearing more from clients and I started hearing more from listeners about the episodes when I was shipping out episodes that I didn't think were as perfect as they could have been. And it saved me a lot of overwhelm because I was wasting a lot of resources. And the last thing I just want to mention here, because it would be negligent for me not to mention this, is that when you are in a space of overwhelm, when you are feeling overwhelmed, where can you trim the fat? What can you take off your plate? Where can you delegate? And there's always something. Maybe it's just the dishes in the sink. Sure, I get it. You like a clean kitchen. But if you're feeling so overwhelmed, right, by your life, and it comes down to you getting sleep or doing the dishes, maybe you just leave the dishes in the sink. Maybe you just do your laundry, in a couple days. Learning how to be a little bit flexible with your expectations. And the only way you can really do that, I think, in a helpful way, is to know your values and standards. Because for me, as much as I love a clean space, laundry is not one of my values and standards for life. But being healthy absolutely is. So if it comes down to me getting enough sleep or me staying up late to do laundry, I'm going to put myself to bed. And sleep is like an amazing magic pill for overwhelm. So when in doubt, if you have tried a lot of these things and you're still feeling overwhelmed, put yourself to bed. And I bet tomorrow you will wake up with more solutions in the forefront of your mind for where the overwhelm is coming from and what you can actually do about it. So I hope this helped. Again, this is a big topic. There's a lot of different angles I could have come at this from, but I really just wanted to get the conversation rolling and give you some things to think about. Hopefully I gave you some good takeaways to consider. And I will see you again in just a few weeks. So again, if you haven't left a review, I cannot tell you how much that means to me. If you would head on over to iTunes and do that. If you love the show, share the show, talk about the show. There is nothing more impactful to the growth of this podcast than you just organically sharing it with people. So thank you in advance, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Grace and Grit podcast. It is time to mend the fabric of the female health story, and it starts with you taking radical responsibility for your own self-care. You are worth the effort, and with a little grace and grit, anything is possible.